I've done a lot of hard things. I mean, at last count, I think I've done 33 or 34 expeditions. And I would say this is the hardest thing I've ever done. Chemo and the monoclonal therapy that I was doing, I was a mess, dude. And then I would build myself up over the course of a few weeks to get to a point where I had a 7 to 10 day decent period, I called it, where I would go and do stuff. I was on Baffin Island in February across the Paalik Valley, combination of ski, trekking, and snowmobile, doing it.
That's Ray Zahab, record-setting extreme adventurer and RCGS explorer in residence. When Ray says something is the hardest thing he's ever done, you know that means it's unbelievably hard. He's coming off a battle with cancer, in which he somehow managed to work in an expedition in the Canadian Arctic at the coldest time of the year. We're thrilled to have him back as our guest on this episode of Explore, a Canadian Geographic podcast. Welcome to all you explorers out there, armchair and in motion. I've got a question for you. Are you a Canadian Geographic magazine subscriber? If not, you really should be. This is an award-winning magazine that's been around for more than 90 years, producing unique and incredibly fascinating stories, photo essays, and maps about Canada, its land, people, environment, and so much more. It's only $28.50 a year. Compare that to a streaming service. What a deal. For that, you get 6 print issues delivered to your house and full digital access to the magazine and its archives. To sign up, visit canadiangeographic.ca/subscribe. Now, Ray Zahab. Ray is not just a friend of this podcast, he's a friend. We're about the same age, we live not far from each other in the Gatineau Hills, and we've had a lot of laughs together, usually over coffee on my front porch. Like a lot of people, I was worried and saddened to learn about his cancer diagnosis last year. Like many as well, I was even more concerned about his decision to go ahead with the Baffin Island expedition in February, in between chemo treatments. Now, Ray is also one of the most positive people I know. He's someone who faces risks head-on and weighs dangers from every possible angle. He's set records for getting to the South Pole on foot, for running across deserts in blazing summer heat. He has carried out expeditions in the harshest places on this planet. Ray's decisions around his cancer treatment were done in close consultation with his doctors and his family. What he chose to do is not likely what most of us would choose. It worked for him. This is his story to tell, and he does so beautifully. Ray Zahab, welcome back to the Explore podcast.
Excited to be back. It's been a while. I think I was here. When was I last
It
here?
might have been a year ago. It was definitely...
No, it was more than a year.
Oh, it was, I can tell you when it was. It was just after you did...
just after I got back from Ellesmere.
Greece,
and
yeah.
before I went to Death Valley.
Yeah.
It was between the two.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah,
Perfect.
yeah.
Okay, now I've got my head on straight.
Yeah.
Now I know where we are chronologically.
Yeah. No, exactly. And we can pick that up because I think Death Valley fits into the story we're going to talk about.
It fits into where I was, and it fits into where I'm going.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because, I guess the question I want to ask, first of all, is how are you, right? Because you have, since you last talked, had this lymphoma diagnosis.
So it's interesting. You know, there's just a million ways I could start this discussion.
Yeah.
Why don't I say this, for starters, that I eat super clean, as the term goes.
Right.
I exercise daily.
Yeah.
I don't drink. I don't eat sugar. I do all the things that, you'd think would be super healthy, yet lo and behold, here we go. I get diagnosed with, it's a form of blood cancer, for people that aren't familiar with it, called lymphoma. And I have a very rare form of that, lymphoma. And, I was one of these people that, I'm hard charging all the time. I mean, that's what my job is.
Yeah.
I do, for your listeners that don't know, and I wouldn't expect them to, know about the stuff that I do. So I cross deserts, the hottest deserts on the planet,
Right.
typically in their hottest time of year. I just love being there. I'm fascinated by it. And I cross the colder regions of the planet. I've crossed the Arctic, and I've been to the South Pole, and I've been across Siberia. Typically coldest times of the year, unsupported, So opposite ends of the thermometer, 20,000 kilometers or so at this point. So I'm used to pushing through things. And then last year, I would say maybe almost the last 2 years, I wasn't feeling 100%. I wasn't feeling right. And we've all had COVID, or many of us have had COVID.
Right.
And although I had the vaccinations and all that jazz, I thought I had long COVID or something. That's what I thought it was. I mean,
wow.
and then I came back from Ellesmere, and you and I were talking here at your kitchen table. And I thought, and I wasn't feeling great in those days. I remember that very distinctly, thinking to myself, well, maybe I'm just exhausted from stress because the expedition didn't go. I've had 3 expeditions in my career of 30 plus expeditions that did not go the way I wanted to. So I take it very personally.
Right, sure.
And so maybe I'm just exhausted from the stress of things not working out. And I'll try to be concise. But when I started training for my next project, which was to cross the Mojave Desert, Death Valley, at its widest point in July of last year, right after I saw you, I started my training. I simply could not recover. And I was getting foggy-headed, worse and worse. The symptoms that I thought were long COVID were becoming debilitating in some ways. And that started the journey to finding out what I had.
Right. And that in itself would be terrifying for you. I mean, long COVID, just because...
Yeah, for sure, because you don't know what's, know.
And you hear people having it for
terrible
and no energy, and I mean, you're all about energy.
And we were talking about before where, anything could be anything. I mean, Lyme disease. You and I are in the woods all the time, and you get ticks, and so I'm super careful with that. And you try to be careful with stuff, right? Yeah. But and so I was training to go to Death Valley, and my wife was convinced I should see a doctor, get some blood work done, which I did. And then they found out I was anemic. Explains, lack of energy. But they didn't know why I was anemic. And then one thing led to another, and then they found out that this number, this blood viscosity or blood proteins, was very high. And that started the process of eventually seeing a hematologist. And then eventually, getting one of those bone where they dig into your bone to get a sample. And then I started a combination of chemotherapy and monoclonal therapy last fall. And I just completed 6 months of that. Right.
So, I mean, I think we're, especially in the realm of your world, I think we all feel somewhat indestructible, right? And I'm just wondering, when you get that diagnosis that you've got cancer, right? Which I don't think any of us think we're going to get, right? But what's that feeling like?
Well, I mean, I was relieved in one sense because for 2 reasons. There's a lot of people that have a hell of a lot worse than I do. There's no doubt about that. So that was one thing. I was like, all right, well, I kind of dodged a bullet. I don't have leukemia. You know what I mean? Or a plethora of other cancers.
Way worse
that my dad died of cancer. I mean, there's a lot of people that I know that have either succumbed or debilitated from cancer.
Right.
Second of all, I had a diagnosis. That's why I felt like shit for so long. It's only so long. I mean, you adapt. When I used to smoke a pack a day, again, for your listeners, I didn't start any of this exploration, ultra running, mountain bike, any of this stuff till I was 30. And until I was 30, I was smoking a pack a day. So normal for me was going up a set of stairs and being winded. Well, that's normal. That's how it feels to go up a set. That's not normal, And I soon learned after quitting smoking and cutting back significantly on partying, not completely in those earlier days of adventure, but whatever. I was able to do things physically that I would have never imagined at, a high level, difficult, but doable. And I would have never known different, right? Because, if I hadn't quit smoking, right? And so it turns out bounding upstairs is the way it should be, right? Well, it was kind of the same thing with this. I got used to feeling like absolute garbage over a period of time. And then when I had a diagnosis, I was like, oh, wait a sec. And then when the chemo started and, I made a lot of commitments during that time. What I have is treatable, not curable.
Right.
So I'm like, I come out of this thing now feeling pretty good. And I'm pretty sure that if my training goes as planned, I'll be better than I was even a few years ago because this thing's been dragging on. But no doubt it's coming back. It's just how long before it comes back in. I got to go through this whole process again. But I'm all right with that. Give me a couple of really great years feeling good, and I'll go through the whole process again of chemotherapy. No worries.
Yeah. Well, you look great, I have to say. I mean,
thank you.
Yeah.
Boy, thank you, sir. And the same to you.
We'll talk later, So I guess the question is, so as someone who's experienced a lot of different extreme environments and you've put yourself through some pretty rigorous stuff. Where does chemo rank into that?
I've done a lot of hard things. I mean, at last count, I think I've done 33 or 34 expeditions. And I would say this is the hardest thing I've ever done. And it wasn't because the physical aspect. I've done things that are harder physically. But I think what it was for me, and you have to keep in mind, chemo and the monoclonal therapy that I was doing. So every 25 days, I would do monoclonal therapy and chemo on one day. And then on the next day, I would go back in and I would do chemo again.
Right.
And then I would have 25 days off, basically. And then I would go back in and do it again. And it was this process for 6 months with, of course, blood work and all this stuff to see where things are going. Some people, there's no effect, like from the chemo drugs. For me, I was a mess, dude. I was just, at first the monoclonal stuff, I there's allergic reactions to it and everything. And it's all given by IV. And when I first started, it would take them 10 hours on the one day to get all the stuff into me, because I just would react and it would have to slow things down. But whatever. The worst part was after going home, I was bloated, sick, felt sick to my stomach, completely devoid of energy. It's like you carpet bombed my body.
Right.
It just was like in bed for 2 or 3 days. Then I would will myself after 2 or 3 days to get moving again. And I would get outside and I'd start walking. And then walking would eventually turn to a little bit of running. And I'd start with a kilometer or two. And if I could run a K without walking, I was doing good. And then I would build myself up over the course of a few weeks to get to a point where I had a 7 to 10 day decent period, I called it, where I would go and do stuff.
Right.
And so I did a modified, an Arctic expedition in February across the Paalik Valley on Baffin Island, combination of ski, trekking, and snowmobile. I had to modify my expedition. I had to adapt mentally and physically to be able to do what I was doing. But I was on Baffin Island in February, in the coldest time of year, in winter, doing it, right? I went to Death Valley with my youngest daughter and between another set of chemos and scouted out some projects that are coming up. I went and guided clients between another period in the Atacama Desert in Chile. And the list goes on. I tried to have something every month during these 6 months to really keep me focused.
In that sort of 7 to 10 day window?
Yes,
is that
but to answer your question, if you said to me, well, I'm a carpenter, and I whacked my finger, how horrible that is to whack your finger with a hammer.
Yes.
Now, if I told you every month on this day, you're going to whack your finger again with that hammer.
Here it comes.
You know it's coming.
Yeah.
And I've had people say to me, well, the good news is you know how bad you feel and you've kind of adapted to it. And I'm like, yeah, you know that? You're absolutely right. I mean, having that is good. But my other part of my brain is saying, dude, that hammer whack is coming and it is not going to be good. And so that part of it is what I think, the combination of that and the physical feeling so gross and having to start all over again, with getting my exercise and my, that was very difficult.
So let's go back to Baffin, because I mean, that's in, as you say, in one of those 25-day windows. You crossed Baffin Island, which is amazing. I'm just wondering how much convincing you needed to do for family, for doctors. I mean, were doctors okay? Obviously, somebody signed off on this.
I literally have had, I can't even say it, like literally the best 2 doctors. Like the first hematologist that I saw was through, an acquaintance and on the Ontario side.
Right.
We live in Quebec, you and I.
Yeah.
And so she was amazing. She diagnosed what was wrong with me. And she said, but listen, you can't be treated in Ontario. You're going to be treated in Quebec.
Yeah.
And, I was very fortunate to be able to get treatment at the Gatineau, in Gatineau.
Hospital.
Yeah. Absolutely amazing people. Amazing staff. I mean, my doctor there, incredible person.
Yeah, great.
And so gave me the encouragement I needed, but set parameters and said, here's what you can do, here's what you can't do, here's what you have to be careful about, here's what you need to know, here's what, and I consulted with my doctor on every single decision I made, because of course I would get those social media, those people on social media would reach out to me and say, what, are you, an idiot? And so I would explain to them, well, no, actually, I am an idiot. Yes, you're correct about that. But here's what the doctor said I could and couldn't do.
Yeah.
So, and my family, the great thing about my family, my daughters and my wife, what I do for a living, I may as well just be assembling cardboard boxes in a box factory. I mean, it doesn't matter what I do. It's very normalized in our household. Daddy's an explorer, and that's just what I do. And, so for them in going through this, they never acted like I was quote unquote ill or anything. They would just kind of, if I got in the way because I was laying on the couch incapacitated, staring at my phone after chemo, they would just say, hey, we want to watch a movie, get out of the way, basically, right? There's no special treatments. And I think that's the way it was great for me. It really was good for me.
Normal's helpful in that moment.
So going to the Arctic, in my mind, Dave, had said to myself, look, I will be proud. I said, like, I'm used to doing hard shit. And really hard and really pushing myself from an endurance perspective. It's what I do.
Yeah.
Fast and light philosophy, moving quickly, covering distance. If you recall, when I crossed Baffin in 2020, I left from the island of Kikik-Tarjuak, self-contained in January 2020, and I ran, pulling my sled from the island across the sea ice over Baffin and into the fjord towards Pangnertung in 4.5 days. It was 220 some odd K, I think I had on my GPS with all the winding I did and everything.
Wow.
It's like almost 50K a day, right? During this process, I've learned that sometimes you just got to adjust your life. You got to adjust your expectations, adjust where I'm at. And I was like, if I can get on this plane and not get sick and have the courage to get on the plane while I've got this thing and go, then that's an achievement. And so I set up achievements along the way. And you know what an achievement for me was on this expedition? Not getting frostbite. The wind chills are in the -80 range. If I got frostbite, that could be a very big problem. So I mitigated all of that.
So what was the original plan then? The original trip
plan
was
to ski with my teammate Val Gagne, who was at one time an ITP youth ambassador, and she guides with my guiding company Capic One now. One of my best friends. So Val Gagne, myself, and Kevin Valley, who's a very good friend of mine, one of my best friends. We skied to the South Pole together. We skied across Siberia together, or ran across Siberia together. He's just an incredible athlete. He's rode the Northwest Passage, or the majority of it. And we went to Ellesmere together and are going back to Ellesmere together next year. So the three of us, the goal was to ski from the island of Kikik-Tarjuak, sort of southerly, if you will, and eventually take the long way around through these fjords. I'm doing I'm drawing the map with my hand right now.
There's an arc. Ray is making an arc.
Making an arc, going up this fjord, and then into the Paalik Valley, crossing the Paalik Valley on Baffin Island, which my friend Billy Arnacook from Kikik-Tarjuak has told me about for so many years, how beautiful it is. Cross that valley, and then ski into the opposite fjord, the name escapes me right now, from Pangnertung, and then climb the mountain that's on the back of Pangnertung and down into town. 21 days.
21
That was the goal.
So that is no longer, it can't be on the table.
No, it's like I got 10 days door to door, max. And I go with 10 days, not feeling good the first few days. Like knowing I still am not right. I'm not right. I'm bloated and I feel gross still. But
can I just say too that an important thing about being a successful explorer is the ability to adapt, right? And you've been doing that now for 20.
You have to be humble. I wasn't going to go and say hard charge and say, all right, frig it. I'm just going to put my face in the wind and get frostbite and risk dying of an infection because I think I'm a badass or something ridiculous. No, you have to be able to humbly approach these things. I've always been or tried to, and I work on it all the time, but approach these environments with great humility because we're visitors to these places. And so these places, it's a constant learning curve. So now even more saying, you don't know everything, you don't know shit. Like, go into it, and although you've done all these past expeditions, take what you've learned, apply it, but add an extra layer of humility in your approach to this expedition and say, hey, this is not the time for me to try and hard charge something. It's time to go to this place I love so much, explore a new part of Baffin Island that I haven't been, that my friends have told me about for a long time, and do it. It's still going to be really hard. It's still epic. It's an adventure. It's a different kind of adventure, but get out there and do it, because other days will come. Dave, if I, in my mind, I was halfway through chemo, and I'm saying to myself, if I get through this and I'm feeling awesome at the end of chemo and I'm training my ass off for what's next, I'll do the endurance thing again. I'll do all that risk stuff again. This is risky enough for where I am in my life at this point. That's what I was saying to myself.
Excellent. So it's the same crew, but you're obviously, how are you short? Is it still kicked to Pangnertung?
Everything was the same, but we did the first part on snow machine till we got to the coast of Baffin, and then started skiing up through spent 40 hours in a tent there, and then
get to know your travel partners.
Waiting out a windstorm. And because I couldn't risk being in that with those windy conditions with the frostbite. And then we carried on skiing and trekking, and then rejoined with the snowmobile team. And then took snowmobiles the rest of the way. And that was honestly It's the most epic snowmobile. Like, we were snowmobiling. My buddies, Billy and his crew, they were JP, and they were snowmobiling over dry rocks. We're pushing Conatics over because it's all wind blowing, and Billy says there's so much less snow there at this time of year. Mind you, if you recall, when I crossed Death Valley last year, I took weather data, very accurate weather data, carrying devices, west to east, the entire transect, and collected weather data of the hottest place on Earth on a single transect at the hottest time of year. This time, we took our devices and went to one of the coldest places on Earth to record accurate weather data along this entire transect, and combine this cold weather data with Billy's knowledge of this area at this time of year and how has it changed over the years. All of this to be combined for educational programming for our next Impossible to Possible Youth Expedition, which is happening next month.
Sure.
So we had all this weather data, and so I'm getting, asking Billy questions about the area and learning, and there's a lot less snow now in that area than there has been in the past.
Yeah.
So anyhow, dry rock, snowmobiling, all kinds of crazy stuff.
Yeah, nuts. I mean, so 6 months, you're halfway through chemo. I mean, how are you feeling? Like, what is
At that time?
Yeah.
Well, it has
like, what are you noticing about yourself? Yeah.
So the crazy thing was, after the first round last fall, a week after, I said to my wife, "Oh my God, I feel good. I feel different." And I was warned, "Hey, you feel good now because we've beaten down that amount of blood viscosity you have. I still don't have my red blood cells back. It takes time to grow those again, right?
Yeah.
But we're starting to hammer down this a little bit. But there's a cumulative effect to the chemo. And when we went to Baffin, that was when I first said to myself, wow, I feel good, but I'm not sure I feel as good as I did in past months."
Right.
And then I would really see that in the coming months. It took me, for example, in month 5, I went with my daughter to Death Valley to do some scouting. That was the trip that I did in that 7 to 10 day period. And we were running every day and scouting and all that. Luckily, she'd wait up for me and we'd take breaks and that sort of thing. But I really thought to myself, whoa, I am not feeling good at all.
Yeah.
And then, anyhow. And then I've bounced back. Now I'm a month out and I'm feeling good. I'm training like crazy and I feel good, But we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, was there much convincing with Kevin? And sorry, your other partner was...
Kevin Valley and Val Gagne.
Was there a lot of convincing with them? I mean, they must have had some nerves a bit, with your condition. Or... Yeah,
but they know me and we all know each other so well. Yeah. And Val is like a sister, right? And absolute beast. Yeah. I mean, she's incredible. She comes for training. And she was like, junior national cross-country ski team, national team rowing. Yeah. I mean, can you imagine the engine? And then I got to go cross-country skiing with her. Forget it. Like, you're not keeping up with her, right? Yeah. But at least when we go running, I can hold my own with her. But, she knows me inside out, and there's a trust that's built. Yeah. Kevin and I have done a lot of long things together. Yeah. That require, when we crossed Siberia, in Lake Baikal, Siberia in February 2010, it required a tremendous amount of patience, resilience. There was pain. We were covering huge distances. We were running unsupported. 650K as the crow flies, but we actually did 700K in 13 days. Yeah. You do the math on that, pulling 110-pound sleds each of us. That's a lot of distance every day running. And so we've done hard things together. So coming together and gelling as a team under these circumstances for something completely different was not even a question factor. Yeah.
So what was like a most memorable place? I mean, you talk about going to valleys you'd never been before, fjords and stuff. Like what were you seeing?
The most memorable was when we rolled up on this lake where there's tons of char and people go fishing there all the time from Pangnirtung. They come in and they go fishing. And we were in one of the there's like a little cabin, tiny little cabin, fishing shelter that somebody had put together. Nice. It was cozy inside, it was like, it was sort of a windowless box, if you will, with a kerosene stove in the corner. And we all piled in, and it was just enough room for all of us to get in there. And my buddy Jesse was there, my buddy Howie as well. They were rolling with Billy and JP, and Howie's a photographer from Colorado, and Jesse's from here in Chelsea. And do you know Jesse? Mm-mm. Oh, he's amazing. Doug Haas, he's a great guy. And so Jesse was shooting video, and so we all get in this cabin together, and a couple of young lads, we hear snowmobile, like it's late at night, we hear snowmobile. who is possibly out here? Because not too many people are rolling through in February, right?
Yeah.
And these two young lads come in and they got a garbage bag, and inside they had like a frozen leg of caribou. And it turns out Billy knew these young lads. They were from Kikik-Tarjuak, and they were riding through. And they were like, "Hey, you guys want some char?" And we're like, "Let's do it." And so it was just sitting around carving up char. So I had char on the mind because we also had char, but this caribou, and we were carving up this caribou, and just, I don't know if you've ever had frozen raw caribou. It's one of the greatest things in the world. It's just so amazing. I had it so many times. It's one of my favorite things.
Amazing.
Oh, dude,
What's it taste like? Like, how would you compare?
The best carpaccio you've ever had in your life. It's the greatest thing. It's just so. Caribou's the best.
Yeah.
It's a toss up for me. I also love the char.
Yeah,
raw,
char is
amazing.
Which
it's like sashimi, char sashimi. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's like it's a salmon, but it's even better somehow.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's incredible. So that it was the most memorable moment. Us all hanging out, digging in on this leg of caribou and laughing and just having a grand old time. That was the greatest memory. Now, obviously there's all the other, we were 40 hours in our tent stuck in this snowstorm, or windstorm, and then the wind had calmed as the sun was coming up, and on the, after the 40 hours more or less were over, and I stepped out of the tent to go to the bathroom, and just looking across the valley, and as the sun, and remember, sun coming up, I mean, the sun's only up for 6 hours. At that point, I think we were at 6 hours, but still low on the horizon. And just the way it looked, and I thought to myself, well, I'm still alive, and I'm out here enjoying this, and this is amazing. And what a gift it is to be here in this place with people that you love, doing something really cool. And maybe it's not the way I would normally do it, but the reward of being there was greater than maybe it would have been otherwise. I appreciated being there more than maybe I would have appreciated it before,
Yeah. Well, is there a benefit, do you think, for you where you were at that point, to sort of removing yourself from the patient place too? You know what I mean? Like, I
just never really felt like, I felt obviously like a patient, but from day one, I said to myself, I can give myself permission to take 6 months off and do nothing.
Yeah.
Just deal with this, right? And instead, I chose to take this head on in a mental aspect, emotional aspect, and physical aspect. So that meant, from a physical perspective, that I was going to get myself as friggin' fit as I could between each chemo session. That I was going to go into this not just whatever, getting through it and eating McDonald's in between. Like, I was going to be juicing. I was going to be eating the healthiest food I could. I was going to get as much sleep as I could. I was going to exercise. I was doing research. I was doing all the things that I needed to do. On the physical side. On the emotional side, I needed to come to terms with the fact that I was going to deal with this thing. People are dealing with much worse things, but that I would share with others what I was experiencing. It's relative. The most difficult things that we go through in life are relative to us as individuals. I knew this was going to be very difficult for me. Maybe easy for someone else. Very difficult for me. When I was sitting there in chemo, you're not alone sitting there getting the chemo. There's people all around you getting chemo. And I talked to people. And for some people, they were on their second bout. And I'd say, well, like, were the symptoms bad? No symptoms. So, are you kidding me? Other people in way worse shape than me. So I had to deal with it on my own terms, and what it meant to me. And then from a mental perspective, I need goals. It's just the way I am. I need to have goals every month. Yeah. So I said, okay, each month I'm going to do what I can do. I'm going to do something cool. And that's what I'm going to do for the next 6 months. I got 7 to 10 days where I'm good. I figured that out. Let's go. I'm going to do something.
I mean, what have you learned about yourself coming out of this?
Well, I definitely have learned that, not to take for granted feeling good. Yeah. Like, I've done a lot of really neat things and it gives you time to reflect. Like, one of the every weekend that I would go through chemo, I would do these social media things because I had time, just sitting around doing nothing. And one of them, I did the top 10 most difficult expeditions I've done, just to make it fun, especially for the young people that follow along with my stuff. And through Instagram stories, I basically counted down the top 10. And I knew what people were thinking was going to be number one was the running the Sahara expedition, 111 days, 7,500K. But in fact, it wasn't the most difficult thing. The most difficult thing I did was cross the Atacama Desert, which was 1,200K with minimal resupplies in the heat of summer. The navigation was difficult. I mean, look, we could do a whole episode on how hard that expedition was. Yeah. But it was, for me, the most difficult expedition I'd done. And the excitement that people got from it and the energy that I was seeing from reading those fun, it was all for fun and online contests and whatnot. But I looked back and I thought, wow, I remember though doing those things, all these things, and how invincible I thought I was.
Yeah.
And that I was, it's a good and bad thing. It's good to feel that way, but maybe not, you shouldn't feel that way all the time. You got to keep in mind that something can happen. And so I leave from this knowing that the path forward, to approach the path forward again, like I said, like I did with Baffin, with humility and with acceptance that more than likely I'm going to go through this again, unless there's a cure or something else happens. Could happen. But to remain as positive as possible and be grateful that I'm coming out of it. And even during chemo, my red blood cells were climbing each month.
Right.
I mean, that just doesn't happen. That doesn't normally happen to my knowledge. And so I was fortunate that my body was fighting back and I was giving it everything it could. And so, I'm doing training. Before this podcast, I was out. It's been a month since chemo. I was out 20K on the trails this morning. I'm building back, right? And so there's gratitude. I have a tremendous amount of gratitude that I can do this, where others are weathering much more difficult cancers and diseases and whatnot, that in my own life, though, in the confines of my own life and relative to my own life, very grateful. So in short on that, I made a post the other day and I said, what I went through this year was the most difficult thing probably that I've been through, but also it's one of the greatest things because it just teaches you things also that you can't put into words about yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. What's important. Yeah.
There's like these emotional subtleties that can't be verbalized. It's very difficult.
Yeah, no, amazing. I mean, to that end, what bookended this sort of whole story for you? I mean, you sort of first noticed this in Death Valley, right? And then one of my favorite moments on social media with you is seeing the posts with you and your daughter back in Death Valley again. And I mean, it's just beautiful. Like, just to see a father and daughter together is just a lovely thing. But for you to go back to that place with her, and I mean, what was that moment like?
Well, it's interesting because my oldest daughter had qualified for the Quebec Games for Nordic skiing.
Congratulations!
And we didn't know that. Like, everything was like it was March break for the kids, right? And it just so happened that March break fell a little closer to the chemo I just had. Than it normally did, but whatever. I mean, it was still within that window of when I start to feel all right. And my youngest was like, well, I don't want to go to the Quebec Games and watch my sister all week. I said, well, okay. I was supposed to go to Death Valley the following week to scout some routes and do some stuff in the Mojave General. And I said, well, hey, guess what? I'll back up my trip. Not a big deal. Change things around. You want to go with me to Death Valley? And she's like, yeah, why not? And so she's the youngest one at, just turned 12.
Nice.
So during the pandemic, before the pandemic, we were doing epic trips with them, but she was only old enough to do a certain amount of epicness, right? So, we went out to Grossmore and did everything because my wife's from Newfoundland. So we went out there. And then, Adirondacks, numerous times, climbing mountains, epic trail runs and all that. But really, that was the extent of her travel.
Yeah.
So we get off the plane in LA, to go to Death Valley. The first thing we see is a palm tree. Well, she's never seen a palm tree, right? And so then I knew right then, oh man, this is going to be awesome. And she's a much better runner than I am, so this is going to be epic. And to be in massive sand dunes and being in remote areas that really only I've been into, it's like some of these nooks and crannies that I've been into before, and to be able to share that place with her was just awesome.
Yeah, and she'll remember that for the rest of her life.
Oh yeah,
there's no question like that. It was beautiful. Anyway, I definitely encourage people to follow Ray because there is.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, no question. No, there's a lot of the positivity you're talking about comes through in your posts. So it's definitely...
it's what life is, right? I mean, you got. Everything just moves so quickly now. In the world we live in, I mean, there's just so many things in our lives that create stress or adversity in our lives in general.
Yeah.
That, for me, even in this time period, I've tried to still remain looking at the glass half full, and at the worst of times, overflowing at the best of times. And so, you gotta just, it's perspective. It's all perspective,
Nice. What's next for Ray Zahab?
Well, I'm, a month post last chemo, and now I'm training harder. I got, I'm focused on some summer projects that I'd like to do. I'd like to do a special project down in the Mojave I'm looking at doing. Getting back to Ellesmere with Kevin next year is a big goal for ours. I've got some Capic 1 projects where I'm guiding clients in the Atacama Desert and across Ayuitik and Baffin Island. I've as well got Impossible to Possible. I mean, post-pandemic, it's our first major project. We'll be going to Nunavut in June with a group of youth. And so, I got lots on the horizon, that I'm focused on. So it keeps the wheels turning and keeps me sharp and busy,
Yeah. Has your idea of what an explorer is, has that changed in the past 6-8 months?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I don't know if I'm in love with the term explorer anymore. I mean, I just don't know if I have, we live in such a different world. I don't know. Explorer seems to be like a sort of a term from the past. Maybe I'm wrong on that. I have no idea. All I know is for me, I think, and as I get later into my career, I still got wheels. I can still hustle. I can still move. And as long as I can, I want to move like that. But I really have enjoyed, being back in the Eastern Arctic, for example, 20 times? Yeah. The friendships that I have. It's funny. I used to go for the geography. Now I go for the friendships. And then the geography is awesome too. Do you know what I'm saying? So there's that whole aspect, culturally, emotional, that I'm attached to with these places that has changed my vision and version of what adventure and exploration and all these things are. It's much more, holistic, whole approach to what I'm doing.
Yeah. And I hear you about the Arctic too, because I've spent much less time than you have up there, obviously. But it's a very different feel in terms of the community and the people up there than it is down south here. I'd encourage people to check it out.
You have to go to as a Canadian if you can, and when you can, and we're all different points in our lives, and but if you're planning, your trip of a lifetime, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna do this one big trip of a lifetime. I mean, it really is. Put it on the list.
Go north. Go north.
Yeah.
Well, listen, Ray, it's great to see you again, and it's great to see you doing so well. We look forward to having you back here soon.
Thanks, buddy. Can't wait.
That's it for this episode of Explore. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed it, please rate and review us. It helps others to find these interviews. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Until next time, when we'll explore again. I'm David McGuffin.
I think right now we're enjoying very much looking back at the Earth, and it's just a fantastic experience, and I just can't wait to get back and start telling people.
We left Simpson about June 10th with the Fur Brigade, consisting of a number of yacht boats, each manned by 10 voyageurs.
For us Inuit, it means that Inuit oral history is very strong.
And we flew low over every inch of the country that could be. We were hoping that he would fire at us.